They thought they were saving a child's life. But within weeks, they started locking their bedroom door at night. The Hammond family had everything a suburban household could want in Cedar Falls, Iowa. David, a 42-year-old insurance adjuster, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and Sarah, a 38-year-old elementary school teacher whose laugh could fill a room. They lived in a 2-story colonial house with a wraparound porch, complete with the white picket fence that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Their golden retriever, Murphy, would chase squirrels across the manicured lawn, while neighbors waved from their morning jogs. But there was an emptiness in their home that no amount of suburban perfection could fill. After 7 years of marriage and countless fertility treatments, the Hammonds had accepted that biological children weren't in their future. The miscarriages had been devastating, each one leaving Sarah a little more withdrawn, David a little more protective. The final loss, at 12 weeks, had nearly broken them both. "We have so much love to give," Sarah would tell her sister during their weekly phone calls. "There's a child out there who needs us. I can feel it." David wasn't as immediately convinced. The man who calculated risk for a living couldn't help but run through worst-case scenarios. But watching his wife light up whenever she saw children at the grocery store or helped her students with their backpacks after school, he knew they had to try. The decision to adopt internationally came after months of research. Domestic adoption felt too uncertain, too many stories of birth parents changing their minds at the last moment. Sarah couldn't handle another loss. International adoption, while complex, seemed more definitive, more final. They chose Romania after connecting with Hearts Across Borders, a reputable agency that specialized in Eastern European adoptions. The country had recently reopened its international adoption program after years of restrictions, and the agency assured them that there were many children in desperate need of loving homes. The process was exhausting. Mountains of paperwork, background checks, home studies, financial audits. Social worker Martha Chen visited their home 3 times, each visit feeling like a test they might fail. She walked through every room, asked about their relationship, their childhoods, their plans for discipline. Sarah had scrubbed the house until it gleamed, as if cleanliness could prove their worthiness as parents. "You seem like wonderful people," Martha had said during the final home study, making notes on her clipboard. "But international adoption isn't easy. These children often come from traumatic backgrounds. Are you prepared for attachment issues, behavioral problems, possible developmental delays?" David and Sarah nodded eagerly. They'd read every book, attended every seminar. They understood that love might not be enough at first, that healing would take time. They were ready. The call came on a Tuesday in March. Sarah was grading second-grade math tests when her phone rang, displaying the Hearts Across Borders number that had become familiar over the past 8 months. "We have a match," said coordinator Lisa Brennan, her voice warm with excitement. "A little boy, 6 years old. His name is Alexandru, but he goes by Alex. He's been in the Bucharest Children's Home for 2 years, after his grandmother could no longer care for him. Parents deceased. He's healthy, bright, and according to his caretakers, he's been asking about having a family of his own." Sarah's hands shook as she held the phone. After all this time, there was an actual child, a little boy who needed them as much as they needed him. "Can we see his file?" she managed to ask. "I'm emailing it to you right now. Take your time looking it over. But I have to tell you, Sarah, he won't last long. Healthy 6-year-old boys are rare in the system. If you're interested, we need to move quickly." The photograph that loaded on Sarah's laptop screen made her gasp. Alex had dark hair that fell across his forehead and enormous brown eyes that seemed to hold too much sadness for such a young face. He was small for his age, the file noted, likely due to early malnutrition, but otherwise healthy. His medical records were sparse but showed no major concerns. A few instances of what the Romanian doctors had labeled behavioral incidents, but the file explained that aggression and withdrawal were common among institutionalized children. David found Sarah crying at the kitchen table when he came home from work, the laptop still open to Alex's photo. "He's ours," she whispered, not looking up from the screen. "I know it sounds crazy, but I can feel it. This is our son." David sat beside her and studied the boy's face. Something about the eyes bothered him, though he couldn't put his finger on what. They seemed too knowing, too guarded for a 6-year-old. But then he looked at his wife, saw hope blazing in her expression for the first time in months, and his reservations melted away. "Then let's bring him home," he said. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, wire transfers, and sleepless nights. They converted the spare bedroom into a child's room, painting the walls a soft blue, and filling it with toys Sarah had been collecting for years. A wooden train set, shelves of picture books, a rocking chair where she imagined reading bedtime stories. The flight to Bucharest was Sarah's first time leaving the country. She gripped David's hand during takeoff, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and terror. After all this time, they were finally going to meet their son. The Bucharest Children's Home was nothing like the cheerful orphanages in movies. The building was concrete and sterile, smelling of disinfectant and something else Sarah couldn't identify. Their footsteps echoed in empty hallways as director Ileana Popescu led them to a small room with fluorescent lighting and plastic chairs. "He is shy at first," she explained in accented English. "But good boy, very smart. Sometimes too smart, perhaps." When the door opened and Alex walked in, Sarah's breath caught. He was smaller than she'd expected, probably closer to the size of a 4-year-old despite his age. He wore clothes that were too big for him, his dark hair neatly combed, but unable to hide the wariness in his eyes as he looked between the American couple and the director. "Alex," Ms. Popescu said in Romanian, then switched to English. "These are David and Sarah. They want to be your new mama and papa." The boy said nothing, just studied them with an intensity that made David shift uncomfortably in his plastic chair. Finally, Alex approached Sarah slowly, stopping just out of arm's reach. "Hello," he said in careful English. "You want me?" The question broke Sarah's heart. She knelt down to his level, fighting tears. "Yes, sweetheart. We want you very much. We want to take you home and be your family." Something flickered in Alex's eyes, too quick to interpret. Then he nodded solemnly and held out his hand for her to shake, as if sealing a business deal. The legal proceedings took 3 days. 3 days of sitting in government offices, signing documents, and waiting. Alex stayed at the children's home but visited with them each afternoon. He was polite, almost formal, answering their questions in his limited English but never offering information about himself. When Sarah tried to hug him goodbye after their second visit, his whole body went rigid, and she quickly stepped back. "Give him time," Ms. Popescu assured her. "Many of our children have difficulty with physical affection. It will come." On their final day in Romania, as they prepared to take Alex to their hotel before the flight home, the director pulled David aside. "There is something," she said quietly, glancing toward Alex, who was sitting in the hallway with Sarah. "The boy, he has been here 2 years, yes? But before that, we know very little. His papers, they are not complete." Romania in the 1990s, after Ceausescu, there was much chaos. Many records lost. But he is good boy. Just be patient and careful. David wanted to ask what she meant by careful, but Alex appeared in the doorway, a small duffel bag containing all his worldly possessions slung over his shoulder. "I am ready," he announced, his voice carrying an odd formality that David attributed to English being his second language. The flight home was difficult. Alex had never been on a plane, and while he didn't cry or throw tantrums like some children might, his silence was somehow more unnerving. He sat perfectly still between David and Sarah, declining snacks and entertainment, just staring out the window with those dark, knowing eyes. Cedar Falls welcomed them home with a surprise party organized by Sarah's school colleagues. The house was decorated with balloons and a banner that read, "Welcome home, Alex." But the boy seemed overwhelmed by the attention, retreating to a corner and watching the adults with the same intensity he'd shown in Romania. "He's just tired," Sarah explained to their guests, though privately she was worried. She'd expected some adjustment period, but Alex's behavior was almost robotic. He answered questions when asked directly but never initiated conversation. He ate what was put in front of him without complaint, but never asked for seconds. When bedtime came, he brushed his teeth, put on the new pajamas Sarah had bought, and climbed into bed without a single question about where the bathroom was or what time breakfast would be. "Good night, sweetheart," Sarah said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. But Alex turned away before her lips could touch his skin. "Good night, Sarah," he replied, his voice neutral. Not Mom or Mama as she'd hoped, just her first name. The first week passed quietly. Too quietly. Alex went through the motions of being a child, but something felt fundamentally wrong. He never played with the toys they'd bought him, never asked to watch cartoons, never cried when he got hurt. When Sarah found him in his room, he was usually sitting on his bed, hands folded, staring at the wall. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask. "Nothing," he'd reply. Always the same answer. David tried a different approach, attempting to engage Alex in typical father-son activities. He set up the train set in the living room, hoping to spark some interest. Alex watched politely as David demonstrated how the pieces fit together, but showed no desire to play himself. "Would you like to try?" David offered, holding out a locomotive. "If you want me to," Alex replied, taking the train but holding it awkwardly, as if he'd never seen a toy before. It was Sarah who first noticed that Alex never seemed to grow. Not physically, which would be expected over such a short time, but in other ways. His clothes still fit exactly the same after a month. His appetite never changed. His sleep schedule was rigid. In bed at exactly 8:30, awake at exactly 6, no matter what. Most 6-year-olds had growth spurts, preferences, bad days, and good days. Alex was consistent to an unnerving degree. The vocabulary was another issue. For a child who'd only been learning English for 2 years in the orphanage, Alex's grasp of the language was remarkably sophisticated. He never used the wrong verb tense, never struggled with complex concepts. When Sarah's colleague mentioned that her own 6-year-old was still learning to tie his shoes, Sarah realized she'd never seen Alex struggle with any basic task. He tied his shoes perfectly, used utensils with adult precision, never spilled or made messes. "He's just mature for his age," David said when Sarah brought up her concerns. "Maybe life in the orphanage forced him to grow up fast." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. She'd taught hundreds of 6-year-olds over her career. She knew how they moved, how they spoke, how they played. Alex was like a small adult wearing a child's costume. The night terrors started in their 3rd week together. Sarah woke to screaming from Alex's room, a sound of pure terror that had her stumbling down the hallway in her pajamas. She found him sitting up in bed, eyes wide but unseeing, speaking rapidly in Romanian. When she tried to comfort him, he lashed out, his small fists surprisingly strong. "Alex, sweetheart, you're safe," she kept repeating, but he didn't seem to hear her. The episode lasted nearly 10 minutes before he simply stopped, looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, and lay back down. "Bad dream," he said calmly, as if nothing had happened. The pediatrician they took him to after the 3rd night terror was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a woman in her 50s who'd been treating children for over 20 years. She examined Alex thoroughly, noting his small stature and requesting copies of his medical records from Romania. "His growth pattern is concerning," she told David and Sarah privately while Alex sat in the waiting room. "He's measuring in the bottom 5th percentile for height and weight. That's not uncommon for children from institutional settings, but I'd like to run some tests. Blood work, maybe some X-rays to check bone development." "What kind of tests?" Sarah asked. "Hormone levels, nutritional markers, developmental assessments. I also want to order something called a bone age study. It uses X-rays of the hand and wrist to determine skeletal age, which sometimes differs from chronological age in cases of severe malnutrition or other developmental issues. The tests were scheduled for the following week, but the results wouldn't come back for several days. In the meantime, life with Alex continued to feel increasingly surreal. He never asked for anything, never requested specific foods, never wanted to go to particular places, never showed preferences about clothes or activities. When Sarah took him shopping for school supplies, preparing to enroll him in first grade, he selected items with the same mechanical precision he applied to everything else. Number 2 pencils, a red folder, a blue notebook. No cartoon characters, no bright colors, nothing that suggested the choices of an actual child. "Don't you want anything special?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the rows of colorful backpacks decorated with superheroes and princesses. Alex selected a plain black backpack without looking at the others. "This one is adequate," he said. Adequate. What 6-year-old used the word adequate? School registration was scheduled for late August, just 2 weeks away. Sarah arranged a meeting with the principal of Cedar Falls Elementary, where she taught third grade, to discuss Alex's placement and any special needs he might have as an international adoptee. "Has he been assessed for grade-level placement?" Principal Janet Murphy asked, reviewing the sparse educational records from Romania. "His file indicates he's been in some form of schooling, but the documentation is incomplete." Sarah hadn't thought about grade placement beyond the assumption that a 6-year-old would enter first grade. "He seems very bright," she said. "His English is excellent and he's quite mature. Why don't we do an informal assessment?" Mrs. Murphy suggested. "Better to place him appropriately from the start than have to make adjustments later." The assessment was conducted by the school's reading specialist, Mrs. Carol Hendricks, a veteran educator who'd been evaluating children's academic levels for over 15 years. She started with simple first-grade materials, basic sight words, simple addition problems, age-appropriate reading passages. Alex completed everything without effort. Mrs. Hendricks moved to second-grade materials, then third. Alex continued working with the same mechanical precision, showing no signs of being challenged. When she presented him with a fifth-grade reading passage about the solar system, he read it aloud with perfect pronunciation and answered comprehension questions with sophisticated insights about planetary orbits and gravitational forces. "That's quite unusual," Mrs. Hendricks said quietly to Sarah afterward. "His academic abilities are clearly advanced, but there's something else. The way he approaches problems, his reasoning patterns, they're not typical of how children think. Even gifted children show more curiosity, more emotional investment in learning. Alex seems to be going through motions." Sarah felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "It's hard to explain. When children read, even when they're advanced readers, they react to the content. They laugh at funny parts, show concern during suspenseful moments, ask questions about things that interest them. Alex read that passage about space like he was reading a grocery list. Perfect comprehension, zero emotional engagement. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the house settle around them. Alex never made noise after bedtime. No tossing and turning, no getting up for water, no calling out from nightmares unless he was having one of his episodes. The silence from his room was absolute. She got up to check on him, a habit she'd developed despite knowing he'd be exactly where she'd left him. His door was slightly ajar, and she could see his small form under the covers, completely still. But as she started to turn away, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, unblinking in the darkness. "Alex?" she whispered. He didn't respond, didn't acknowledge her presence. Just lay there with his eyes wide open, perfectly still. Sarah watched for several minutes, growing more disturbed by the second. Finally, she pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Only then did Alex turn his head toward her, and for a split second, she saw something in his expression that wasn't childlike at all, something calculating and aware. Then it was gone, replaced by the sleepy confusion she'd expect from a 6-year-old woken in the night. "Sarah? I was sleeping." "Your eyes were open, honey." "Oh." He closed them demonstratively. "Better now?" She wanted to stay, to ask more questions, but something about the way he'd looked at her made her retreat to her own bedroom, where she found David sitting up. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted, climbing back into bed. "David, I think something's wrong with Alex. Really wrong. He's been through trauma, Sarah. It's going to take time." "No, it's not that. It's something else. The way he talks, the way he acts, even the way he sleeps. None of it feels right." David was quiet for a long moment. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think we need to dig deeper into his background, something the adoption agency missed, or didn't tell us, or didn't know themselves." The next morning brought the results from Dr. Morrison's tests. Sarah was at school when the call came, trying to focus on her lesson plans for the upcoming year, while wrestling with her growing anxiety about Alex. The nurse interrupted her classroom setup to say there was an urgent call from the pediatrician's office. "Mrs. Hammond, this is Dr. Morrison. I need you and your husband to come in immediately to discuss Alex's test results." "Is something wrong? Is he sick?" "Please just come in, and bring Alex with you." The drive to the medical center felt endless. Alex sat in the back seat, silent as always, while Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Childhood leukemia, rare genetic disorders, brain tumors. Anything seemed preferable to the growing certainty that something was fundamentally deceptive about their entire situation. Dr. Morrison's office was small and cluttered, with certificates covering one wall and family photos covering another. She gestured for them to sit. Alex in a child-sized chair that suddenly seemed too small for him, though Sarah couldn't say why. "I'm going to be direct," Dr. Morrison began, her voice carefully professional. "The bone age study came back, and the results are extremely unusual. Based on the X-rays of Alex's hand and wrist, his skeletal development indicates he's not 6 years old." Sarah felt the room tilt. "What do you mean?" "The bone age study suggests he's significantly older, at least 12, possibly 14 or 15 years old." David leaned forward. "That's impossible. Look at him. He's tiny, which is what makes this so puzzling. His physical stature suggests severe growth delay, possibly caused by malnutrition, hormone deficiencies, or genetic factors. But his bones tell a different story. They show the development pattern of an adolescent or young adult." Sarah looked at Alex, who was sitting perfectly still, his face showing no reaction to the conversation happening around him. Either he didn't understand what was being discussed, or he understood perfectly and was choosing not to respond. "There's more," Dr. Morrison continued. "The blood work shows some anomalies as well. His hormone levels are consistent with someone who's gone through puberty, not a prepubescent child. And there are other markers that suggest he's been taking medications to suppress growth hormone production." "What kind of medications?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. "The kind that would keep someone small, maintain a childlike appearance despite their actual age. They're sometimes used in legitimate medical treatment for children with precocious puberty, but in this case, given the other findings..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah turned to Alex, who was now looking directly at her with those dark, knowing eyes. "Alex, how old are you really?" For the first time since they'd brought him home, his expression changed. The carefully maintained mask of childlike innocence slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I am 6, he said, but his voice carried a different quality now, less carefully modulated, more natural, and significantly deeper than it had been moments before. "The medical evidence suggests otherwise," Dr. Morrison said gently. "Alex, We're not here to get you in trouble. We want to help, but we need to know the truth." Alex looked between the three adults, and Sarah could practically see him weighing his options. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice was completely different. Still accented, but with the inflection of someone much older. "My name is not Alexandru," he said quietly. "It is Andrei Popov. I am 19 years old." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 19. She'd been trying to mother a 19-year-old man who'd been deliberately deceiving them for weeks. "Why?" was all she could manage to ask. Andrei, she had to think of him as Andrei now, looked down at his small hands. "In Romania, life is very difficult. No money, no work, no future. When I was 16, I learned about American adoption system. Families with money who want children. I found doctor who would give me growth hormone suppressors, make me look younger. I studied how children behave, how they speak. I made new identity papers." "But the orphanage," David said. "Ms. Popescu, the other children? Ms. Popescu, she knows nothing. I paid clerk to put me in system with fake papers. I learned basic English from other children, practiced being young. For 3 years, I waited for American family to choose me. 3 years. Sarah felt sick. This man had spent 3 years in an orphanage, pretending to be a child, waiting for someone like them to come along. "The night terrors," she said. "The Romanian you spoke during them. I forgot to be careful when sleeping. Dreams are hard to control." Dr. Morrison cleared her throat. "I'm obligated to report this to the authorities. This constitutes fraud on multiple levels, not to mention immigration violations." Andrei nodded, unsurprised. "I know. I am sorry. You are good people. I did not mean to hurt you." "Then why?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do this to us?" "Because I was desperate," he said simply. "In Romania, I have nothing. No family, no education, no chance for good life. In America, even in prison, there is more hope than I had there." The authorities were called. Within hours, their home was swarming with social workers, immigration officials, and police officers. The local news crews arrived by evening, having caught wind of the story. Sarah and David found themselves at the center of a media circus, their private tragedy becoming public entertainment. The investigation that followed revealed the sophisticated nature of Andrei's deception. He'd been taking hormones to suppress his growth for over 4 years, starting when he was 15. The physical effects were significant but not irreversible, according to medical experts consulted by the FBI. With proper treatment, he could eventually reach a more normal adult height, though he'd likely always be smaller than average. The psychological evaluation was equally revealing. Andrei showed no signs of intellectual disability or mental illness. He was, by all accounts, a highly intelligent young man who'd crafted an elaborate scheme out of desperation. His knowledge of child psychology and development was extensive, learned through careful observation and study. "He's not a predator in the traditional sense," the FBI psychologist explained to Sarah and David during one of many interviews. "There's no evidence he had any inappropriate intentions toward children or families. This appears to be purely economically motivated, an extreme attempt to escape poverty and gain entry to the United States." But that knowledge didn't make the betrayal any easier to bear. Sarah found herself questioning everything about their time with Alex, Andrei. Had any of it been real? The quiet moments when she'd thought she was helping a traumatized child heal. Had he been laughing at her gullibility? The motherly love she'd poured out. Had it all been wasted on someone who was manipulating her from the beginning? The worst part was that she'd started to love him. Despite his strangeness, despite her growing concerns, she'd felt protective of the small, serious boy who'd seemed so lost and alone. Learning that he was actually a grown man made her feel foolish and violated in ways she couldn't fully articulate. David handled it differently, throwing himself into the legal proceedings and working with their attorney to understand their options. The adoption agency, Hearts Across Borders, was under investigation for their role in the fraud, though initial findings suggested they'd been deceived as thoroughly as the Hammonds. The Romanian orphanage director was also being investigated, though Andrei insisted she'd known nothing about his real identity. "What happens to him now?" Sarah asked their lawyer during one of their meetings. "Immigration fraud is a serious federal crime," attorney Michael Chen explained. "He'll likely face deportation after serving time in federal prison." The fact that he maintained the deception for months, accepted money and resources under false pretenses, and violated his immigration status. It all adds up to significant charges. Sarah felt conflicted about that outcome. Yes, Andrei had lied to them, manipulated them, caused them tremendous emotional trauma. But she couldn't forget that he'd been a desperate teenager when this began. Someone so hopeless about his future that pretending to be a child for years seemed like a reasonable option. The media attention was relentless. Their story had all the elements that captured public fascination: international adoption, deception, a seemingly innocent child who wasn't what he appeared to be. Sarah had to take a leave of absence from teaching as reporters camped outside their home and her school. David's insurance office received dozens of calls from journalists wanting quotes and interviews. The online commentary was particularly brutal. Half the internet seemed to think they were naive idiots who should have known something was wrong. The other half expressed sympathy but peppered it with invasive questions about why they hadn't been able to have biological children, whether they'd been too desperate to adopt to properly vet their situation, whether there had been warning signs they'd ignored. "We did everything right," Sarah told her sister during one of her worst days, when she couldn't stop crying and couldn't bring herself to leave the house. "We went through a reputable agency. We had home studies. We followed every procedure. How were we supposed to know that a 19-year-old man was masquerading as a 6-year-old child?" But doubt crept in during the quiet moments. Had there really been no signs? Looking back, she could see so many red flags: his sophisticated vocabulary, his adult-like mannerisms, his lack of typical childhood behaviors. Had love and desperation made her blind to obvious clues, or had Andrei simply been that skilled at deception? The trial, when it finally came 8 months later, was a media spectacle. Andrei had grown several inches since being taken into custody and starting proper medical treatment. His voice had deepened further, and facial hair was beginning to appear. Seeing him in court, looking more like the young man he actually was, made the entire experience feel surreal. His testimony was detailed and unrepentant. He explained his methodology, his research into American adoption procedures, his careful study of child behavior. He'd watched hours of children's television programming to perfect his act, practiced childlike handwriting, even learned to sleep in positions that would make him appear smaller. "I understand that what I did caused pain," he said during his victim impact statement. "That was never my intention. Mr. and Mrs. Hammond are good people who deserved better. But I was drowning in my old life. This was my only chance to breathe." Sarah chose not to attend most of the trial proceedings. She couldn't bear to see Andrei, couldn't reconcile the memory of the small, quiet boy she'd tried to love with the calculating adult who'd orchestrated such an elaborate deception. David went to some sessions, telling her later that Andrei often looked toward the gallery as if hoping to see them there. The sentence was 42 months in federal prison, followed by deportation to Romania. The judge noted the unusual nature of the crime and Andrei's lack of prior criminal history, but emphasized that immigration fraud undermines the entire legal immigration system and couldn't be treated lightly. "Your desperation may have been real," Judge Patricia Hawkins said during sentencing, "but your methods were sophisticated and deliberate. You deceived not just the Hammond family, but multiple government agencies and social service organizations. The harm you caused extends beyond the immediate victims to include damage to the international adoption system that helps legitimately place children in need." After the trial, Sarah and David tried to rebuild their lives. They moved to a different house across town, hoping to escape the constant reminders and the occasional curious neighbors. Sarah returned to teaching, though she found herself studying her students with new eyes, hyper-aware of every detail of their behavior and development. The questions from well-meaning friends and colleagues never stopped. Would they try to adopt again? Had the experience changed their feelings about international adoption? Did they blame themselves for not seeing the deception sooner? The truth was complicated. Sarah's faith in her own judgment had been shattered. How could she trust her instincts about children when she'd been so thoroughly fooled? David worried about her, watching her second-guess every interaction with her students, every assessment of their needs and abilities. But slowly, very slowly, they began to heal. Sarah started seeing a therapist who specialized in adoption trauma, a field she'd never known existed before their experience. Dr. Patricia Webb helped her understand that sophisticated deception by adults was virtually impossible for prospective parents to detect, especially when all the official channels had been corrupted. "You were victims of an elaborate fraud," Dr. Webb reminded her during one session. "The same instincts that made you vulnerable to Andre's deception. Your desire to help a child in need, your willingness to be patient with behavioral issues, your capacity for unconditional love. Those are exactly the qualities that make someone a good parent. Don't let his actions make you doubt that." David threw himself into advocacy work, connecting with other families who'd experienced adoption fraud, and working with legislators to strengthen verification procedures for international adoptions. He learned that their case, while extreme, wasn't entirely unique. Desperate people around the world had found ways to game the system, though few with Andre's level of commitment and sophistication. 2 years after Andre's sentencing, they received an unexpected letter. It had been forwarded through their attorney, postmarked from a federal correctional facility in Texas, where Andre was serving his sentence. Sarah's hands trembled as she read his careful handwriting. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Hammond, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you do not read this letter. I wanted you to know that I think about you every day, and about the kindness you showed to someone you thought was a child in need. I have been taking classes here and working toward my GED. My English has improved greatly, and I am learning about American history and government. I plan to continue my education when I am released, though I know I will be sent back to Romania. I want you to know that your love was not wasted, even though it was given under false circumstances. For a few weeks, I experienced what it might be like to have parents who cared about my welfare. I had never known that feeling before, and I will carry it with me always. I am truly sorry for the pain I caused. You deserved honesty, and you deserved a real child to love. I hope someday you will have that." With respect and regret, Andrei Popov's Sarah read the letter 3 times before showing it to David. They sat together at their kitchen table, both of them crying for different reasons. For the child they'd thought they were saving, for the young man whose desperation had driven him to such extremes, for their own lost innocence about the world's capacity for deception. "Do you think he means it?" Sarah asked. "The apology?" David was quiet for a long time. "I think he's a complicated person who did a terrible thing for understandable reasons. Whether that makes his apology meaningful or not, I don't know." They never responded to the letter, but Sarah kept it in a drawer in her desk. Sometimes, when she was having particularly difficult days, she'd read it again and try to parse the difference between manipulation and genuine remorse. 3 years later, they tried adoption again. This time, they chose domestic adoption through a local agency, working with birth mothers in their own state. The process was different but no less emotional, filled with its own uncertainties and potential heartbreaks. When Emma came into their lives, a newborn placed with them directly from the hospital by a teenage mother who'd interviewed 3 families before choosing them, Sarah was terrified. Every milestone, every development, every doctor's visit was filtered through her experience with Andre. Was Emma's growth pattern normal? Did her vocalizations sound right for her age? Were her reflexes and responses what they should be? But Emma was undeniably, completely, authentically a baby. She cried when she was hungry, slept in random bursts, went through diapers and bottles with the exhausting regularity that new parents complain about but secretly cherish. She was real in all the ways that Alex had been artificial. As Emma grew into a toddler, then a preschooler, Sarah found herself healing in ways she hadn't expected. Every genuine laugh, every authentic tantrum, every moment of real childhood joy helped restore her faith in her ability to recognize and nurture the needs of an actual child. David watched his wife fall in love with Emma and saw the last shadows of their experience with Andre finally lifting. Sarah still had moments of doubt, still sometimes questioned whether Emma's behavior was appropriate for her age, but those moments became rarer as time passed. The story of their deception became something they shared with other prospective adoptive families, not to discourage them, but to help them understand the importance of trusting their instincts, while also accepting that some deceptions are simply too sophisticated to detect. "The system failed us," David would tell support groups for adoptive families. "But we can't let that failure prevent us from helping children who genuinely need homes. We just have to be smarter about verification, more demanding of agencies, and more willing to ask hard questions." Sarah's perspective was more nuanced. "I spent months thinking I was a terrible judge of character, that I should have known something was wrong. But the truth is, Andre was a master manipulator who'd spent years perfecting his act. The red flags we saw in hindsight weren't obvious in the moment, especially when we were trying to be patient with what we thought was a traumatized child. 5 years after Emma's adoption, when she was a chattering, energetic 4-year-old who left toys scattered through every room of their house, Sarah received another letter. This one was postmarked from Bucharest. Andre had been deported after serving his sentence, and now working as a translator for a legal aid organization that helped Romanian citizens navigate immigration processes. His English had become fluent during his incarceration, and he'd earned his GED along with some college credits through correspondence courses. "I wanted you to know that I am trying to make amends for what I did," he wrote. "I cannot undo the harm I caused to your family, but I am working to prevent others from being victimized by fraud like mine. I help investigate false documentation and assist authorities in identifying suspicious adoption cases. I also wanted you to know that I often think about the short time I spent in your home. While my presence there was based on deception, the kindness you showed was real, and it changed something in me. I had never experienced unconditional care before, even though I was not worthy of it. I hope your family has found happiness and that you were able to welcome a real child into your hearts." This time, after much discussion, Sarah wrote back. It was a brief letter acknowledging his words but making clear that forgiveness was still a work in progress. She told him about Emma, about how becoming a mother to a real child had helped her heal from the trauma he'd caused. "What you did was wrong, and the pain you caused was real," she wrote. "But I'm glad to hear that you're trying to prevent others from experiencing what we went through. That feels like genuine repentance to me. I hope you find peace in your life, and I hope you understand that the capacity for love you saw in our home wasn't wasted. It just took time to find its proper recipient." The correspondence continued sporadically over the years. Andre would update them on his work, his continuing education, his efforts to build a legitimate life in Romania. Sarah would occasionally share updates about Emma's milestones, though she was careful never to include too much personal information. When Emma turned 8, 2 years older than Andre had pretended to be, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much had changed. Emma was everything that Alex had never been: spontaneous, silly, genuinely childlike in her wonder and her fears. She collected stuffed animals, insisted on wearing mismatched socks, cried during sad movies, and asked endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether dogs could understand English. "Mama, why do some people lie about who they are?" Emma asked one day, having overheard a conversation between Sarah and David about their experience. They'd always planned to tell her the story when she was old enough to understand it, as part of helping her appreciate her own adoption story. Sometimes people are so scared or desperate that they make very bad choices, Sarah explained. It doesn't make the lying okay, but it helps us understand why it happened. Were you scared when you found out Alex wasn't really a kid? Very scared, and very sad. We thought we were helping a little boy, but it turned out he was actually a grown-up who was tricking us. Emma considered this seriously. But then you got me instead. Yes, we did, and you're exactly who you're supposed to be. Good, Emma said matter-of-factly. I like being a real kid. It seems more fun than pretending to be one. The final letter from Andrei came when Emma was 10. He was getting married, he wrote, to a woman who knew his full story and accepted his past. He'd been accepted to university to study social work, with plans to focus on child welfare and adoption services. I will spend the rest of my life trying to repair the damage I caused to the system that is meant to protect children, he wrote. I know this cannot undo what I did to your family, but perhaps it can prevent other families from being hurt as you were. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like, even though I was not honest enough to deserve it. I hope Emma knows how fortunate she is to have parents who love her so completely. Sarah shared the letter with David and Emma, who was now old enough to understand the full story of what had happened before she joined their family. Do you think he's really changed? Emma asked. I think people can change, Sarah said carefully. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of time. What matters most is that we learned from what happened and used it to become better parents for you. And to help other families too, David added. Sometimes bad things happen that we can't prevent, but we can try to make sure they don't happen to other people. The Hammond story became part of the training materials used by adoption agencies across the country. Their experience, while extreme, highlighted vulnerabilities in the international adoption system that needed to be addressed. Improved medical verification procedures, better psychological evaluations, and enhanced communication between agencies and foreign institutions all resulted, in part, from the investigation into Andrei's fraud. We never wanted to be famous for this, Sarah told a reporter on the 10-year anniversary of their experience. But if our story helps protect other families and helps legitimate children find homes more safely, then at least something good came from our pain. The reporter asked whether they harbored any remaining anger toward Andrei. Sarah and David exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that comes from years of marriage and shared trauma. Anger is exhausting, Sarah finally said. I was angry for a long time, and it didn't serve me well. What he did was wrong, and there should have been consequences. And there were. But holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him. I think about the desperation that drove a teenager to spend years pretending to be a child, David added. That level of hopelessness is its own kind of tragedy. I'm not excusing what he did, but I can understand why he did it. The camera lingered on their living room, where Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, and her school backpack sat by the front door, normal indicators of a real childhood in progress. Murphy, now gray around the muzzle but still chasing squirrels, wandered through the frame. The most important thing we learned, Sarah concluded, is that love is always a risk. Whether you're adopting a child or having a biological child, whether you're opening your home to someone in need or just opening your heart to another person, there's always the possibility of being hurt. But the alternative, living closed off from love, is worse than the risk. As the news crew packed up their equipment and left, Emma bounced into the living room, her school uniform rumpled from a day of authentic 8-year-old activities. Mom, can Jessica come over for dinner? Her mom said it was okay if you said yes, and we want to work on our science project about volcanoes. And we might make a mess, but we'll clean it up, I promise. Sarah smiled, recognizing the rapid-fire speech pattern and negotiation tactics of a real child, trying to secure a favorable outcome. Yes, she can come over. But you're right about cleaning up any messes. Yay! Emma threw her arms around Sarah's waist in an enthusiastic hug that was all knees and elbows and genuine affection. Later that evening, as David helped Emma with her math homework and Sarah prepared dinner for their expanded group, she reflected on how far they'd come. The house was noisy and chaotic. In all the ways their time with Alex had been eerily quiet. Emma's friend Jessica chattered constantly about her day, interrupted her own stories to ask unrelated questions, and spilled juice on the kitchen table while gesturing enthusiastically about their volcano project. It was everything Sarah had dreamed of when she'd first imagined having a family. Messy, loud, unpredictable, and absolutely real. That night, after Emma and Jessica had successfully created a baking soda volcano that had indeed made a mess, after Jessica's mother had picked her up amid promises to continue the project tomorrow, after Emma had finally been convinced to brush her teeth and go to bed, Sarah found herself thinking about Andre one last time. She wondered if he was happy in his new life, if he'd found legitimate ways to satisfy whatever need had driven him to such desperate measures. She hoped his wife truly understood what she'd taken on, and that his work in social services was genuine rather than another elaborate performance. But mostly she was grateful. Grateful for Emma's authenticity, for David's steady support through their darkest period, for the hard-won wisdom that had come from surviving deception and finding love again. Their family looked different than she'd originally imagined, but it was theirs, built on truth and genuine connection. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Sarah could hear Emma talking to herself in her room, a stream of consciousness narrative about her day that would probably continue until she fell asleep mid-sentence. It was the sound of a real child's mind processing the world around her, unfiltered and honest. The child who wasn't had taught them painful lessons about trust, desperation, and the lengths people would go to escape hopeless situations. But the child who was, their daughter Emma, with her authentic joys and sorrows, her genuine curiosity and stubborn streak, had taught them even more valuable lessons about resilience, healing, and the transformative power of love given freely to someone who deserved it. In the end, that was the story Sarah chose to focus on. Not the elaborate deception that had nearly broken their family, but the authentic love that had ultimately made them whole.